Now I will post something that I personally prefer to consider a science fiction story. It sounds much more reasonable than some of the possible alternatives, and it's easier for me that way because the story itself doesn't really sit well with me. I don't know who the author is. A brief introduction about the circumstances of discovering this text. I live in Moscow, and recently I had to travel to the other end of the city to pick up an order from an online store. Since I had nothing particularly important to do, on my way back to the subway, I plugged in my headphones to block out the extra noise in my head and started weaving wide zigzags through an unfamiliar neighborhood. I have this habit of aimlessly walking around. Along the way, I came across a decent-looking bar, and by the time I left, it was already quite dark, and I was pretty drunk. I had no clear idea of where I was, but after a rough orientation, I chose a direction that seemed to lead to the subway station. I hadn't even walked 2 kilometers before I realized that I had forgotten to pee at the bar. What do guys do in such situations? Obviously they pee on everything in sight. Looking around and seeing no one, I moved closer to the wall of a building I was walking past. In the dirt of the lawn, I noticed a black plastic flash drive. I could easily have missed it. I don't know how long it had been lying there. Out of curiosity, I shoved it in my pocket for a lighter, then forgot about it for a couple of weeks and only rediscovered it yesterday, right before doing laundry. On the flash drive, despite its hardships, it's still readable, though some photos were corrupted. I found a text file called diary.txt and several photos. Finding that particular building now is impossible, for obvious reasons mentioned above, but I'll try to locate it next weekend. I'm sharing the contents of the text file with you, almost unchanged. I've only corrected a few commas and typos where they were visually jarring. Diary. In reality, this isn't a diary. I've never kept a diary. That would be reckless. This text is a report on the events of the past few months. It's likely to come out disjointed and fragmented, as I'm writing it on my last nerves. You will understand why later. And I don't have much time. If you found it, read it and spread the word. I don't expect any help, but people should at least know. I don't even expect anyone to read it at all. My internet is cut off. I can't leave the apartment, so once I'm done, I'll write this text and the photos onto the 3 flash drives I have, and throw them out of the window, almost like bottles with messages. A final, desperate gesture. I entered the Faculty of Philology, just as I hoped. The philology department in the capital gave me the happiest opportunity to leave my family home. University or the army were the only legitimate ways to escape, and if I had failed to get in, I would have gone straight to the military enlistment office. I would have asked to be sent as far away as possible. I could barely stand the atmosphere at home anymore. The army would have been really tough on me, but trust me, I was ready to risk it just to escape my father's influence. My father is a psychopathic bastard and a tyrannical domestic monster, and I would never have written this truth even in an anonymous letter if I still had any hopes of returning to a normal life. So, I did it. The exams were a farce, but I thought I might have a heart attack right in front of the board with a list of accepted students. My name appeared on the list. My parents rented me a 1-bedroom apartment somewhere on the outskirts of the universe. On one side, the building is surrounded by garages and some indistinct industrial zone, while on the other side there's a road, wasteland, and a forest of identical prefab buildings with occasional stores and kindergartens scattered in between. I didn't care. I would have been perfectly fine in a dorm or any dilapidated squat as long as I was left to my own devices. My father immediately rejected the idea of a dorm. It was supposed to be provided to me since I came from far away. No drunkenness or parties for his son, only hard study. He quickly established, for a price, contacts with curators and the dean's office, and any mistake I made would be reported to him instantly. I don't know the owner of this one-bedroom apartment, and I've never seen him. My father found it himself, made all the arrangements, and pays for it with his card. Just like he sends me my monthly allowance. He's a former military man. I am currently in this apartment on the 8th floor of a 12-story building, long as Leviathan. For the first time in my life, I breathed air like this. It was a freedom-scented mix of exhaust fumes. I was free to go anywhere and do whatever I deemed necessary, not just what was expected of me. Weeks went by, but the euphoria never faded. I had spent 17 years either in one or another tiny room, in the company of a broken shadow of an empty woman, who used to be my mother and my father. For the first time, hope for liberation flickered inside me. All I needed was financial independence. I stood on the balcony in the evening, thinking about my plans to find work as a translator or copywriter, and smoked a cigarette, extraordinarily flavorful, because I could smoke it openly. It was at that moment that I noticed something off. As I mentioned before, this building is long, and one side of it turns in the shape of the letter P, forming a small courtyard, so I could see the windows of my own building almost directly across from me. In every illuminated window, people stood motionless, staring into the courtyard. I didn't understand anything at first. I checked the time absent-mindedly. 25 past midnight. There were absolutely no loud sounds outside that could have drawn everyone to the windows. The area was surprisingly quiet. About a quarter of the windows were lit up, but that was still a lot. And in every window stood a person, and in some, there were several. It looked unnervingly creepy for some reason, and I couldn't figure out what they were staring at. Literally a minute later, almost all of them simultaneously stepped away from the windows and disappeared deeper into their apartments. I didn't attach any particular significance to the event, but 2 days later, the exact same thing happened again. This time, I was standing on the balcony with a cigarette and a can of cheap beer, when a figure appeared in each of the illuminated windows. I dropped my half-smoked cigarette in surprise and burned my fingers a little. It was 34 minutes past midnight, and the people stood at the windows for about 50 seconds. The next evening, at midnight, I stood on the balcony, shifting my gaze from the windows to the clock and back. I had my phone in hand, hoping to capture this anomaly. It happened at exactly at 12:45 a.m. Just like the previous times, people approached their windows at the same time. I managed to take a few pictures, but it was pretty much useless. The phone, bought by my father purely for work, had a camera that barely works in the dark, almost not at all. Still, I had some kind of documentation in my hands confirming the strange events unfolding in my building. What's going on with my neighbors? What does this mean? Is it some sort of insane ritual? While transferring the photos to my laptop, I remembered that the usual noise of cardboard panel buildings, the hum that always comes from the walls, seemed to almost die down in the moments when the figures appeared in the windows, though it was hard to judge from the balcony. The next night, I confirmed my theory. In apartment buildings, there's always noise from the walls, except in the dead of night. A television, an argument, footsteps from above, or someone banging out the same annoying piano scales, though it's already late for that. At some point after midnight, always at different times, sometime between 10 minutes past 12 and 1 o'clock in the morning, everything, except for the television and muffled Russian pop music, seems to be cut off. Figures appear in the windows, they stand, they disappear, and the background noise of life in the big building resumes as if nothing happened. This means that my neighbors on the floor, as well as the ones above me, participate every night in some kind of schizoid pantomime. Dropping everything they're redoing, they approach their windows and stare into the courtyard. It's just that from my balcony, I couldn't see this. When I realized that, I felt incredibly uneasy in my new apartment. Taking out the trash, I met my neighbor, a completely ordinary middle-aged woman. She lives next door with her husband and daughter. They moved in not long ago. We laughed at some joke. I solemnly promised not to throw parties or cause any disturbances. Just the usual small talk about nothing. And what? She too jumps up every night to stand at the window like a statue. I had a plan. Around midnight, I started going out into the inner courtyard of the building. I wanted to understand what exactly was attracting the attention of all these strange people, but there was absolutely nothing in the yard. During the day, kids played on the playground. Elderly men joked around on a bench by a makeshift table hammered together from planks, and older boys occasionally kicked a ball around in the hockey rink at night. Though the whole area around the building died out, which in itself wasn't particularly strange. Everyone just stayed indoors, windows lit up and went dark, and in many of them, you could see the colored flicker of television screens. The first floor of the building is entirely occupied by shops, pharmacies, and hair salons. And on the second floor, I couldn't quite make out the person standing there during the X moment. I went out into the yard several times until one night, while patrolling and peering into the windows, in a dark opening at the level of the second floor, bare of any curtains, I finally clearly saw a middle-aged woman and a little girl whose head barely rose above the window frame. They stood motionless, pressed close to the glass, staring directly at me, and their lips were moving in perfect sync. They were saying something. Their sick, fixed stare completely robbed me of my composure. And I ran. The very next night, I went out to the road on the other side of the building, lit by sparse street lights, lit a cigarette, and waited. The building loomed above me like a cliff, having lost all the cozy familiarity typical of prefab blocks. Something in the air of this place felt different. Yes, this time people approached the windows on this outer side, which hadn't happened before. In every single window, in the dark ones too, not just the lit ones. Now I understood that people were standing. Hundreds of people, and they weren't looking into the courtyard, as I had somehow assumed at first. All this time, they had all been looking directly at me. They stood and stared without taking their eyes off me, and probably saying something in unison. Then, half a minute later, they stepped back into their apartments, leaving curtains and drapes swaying. Total silence, and the most terrifying 30 seconds of my life. I started having nightmares. I stopped going out onto the balcony, drew the heavy curtains and pinned them together with safety pins I found in a drawer. In the stairwell, morning and evening, I practically crept around and didn't feel safe until the metro had carried me a couple of stations away from mine. I no longer trusted even a single bit the completely ordinary sounds behind the walls. Piano, a hammer drill, the neighbor's morning cough on the landing, the sound of the elevators, disgusting pop music, the thudding of children's feet. Everything felt fake. Someone was trying to deceive me. I was missing something terribly important. Being a fairly withdrawn person, I hadn't yet made any friends in Moscow close enough to tell about what was happening and ask for help. And what could I even say? That my building was entirely populated by lunatics, that my neighbors were conspiring against me. The obvious conclusion would be the opposite. There's only one crazy person here, and it's me. But I didn't, and still don't feel insane. Just a person who, by bad luck, stumbled upon some horror hiding beneath the mask of everyday life. On my allowance, I couldn't afford to move even to a hostel. At the dean's office, they explained that since I had signed a refusal of a dorm room, I could no longer claim one. All spots had been assigned. I was going to post a story about all this on the internet, but I needed more data. And of course, I never forgot about my father. I didn't skip a single class and studied diligently, trying to spend as little time in the apartment as possible. So I only observed the building's residents on weekends. They all turned out to be not real. They weren't living, they were simulating life. That became obvious to me fairly quickly. To check, I tried observing the residents of neighboring buildings, but that soon bored me. People behaved normally and noticed nothing, which could not be said about the creatures inhabiting the hive disguised as a building. The hive I now lived in. They left the building and purposefully went about their important business. They boarded various kinds of public transport and simply rode in circles, staring out the window. They rode the ring line, made meaningless transfers, and returned. They went into shops and came out without buying anything. They went to the city center, walked somewhere, then simply turned around and went home the same way. They acted out lively conversations on switched-off mobile phones. I saw that twice. As far as I could tell, none of them worked, and no guests from outside ever visited them. Children ran around the playground with cheerful shouts, chasing each other and making little sand pies in the sandbox, making and smashing the same little sand pie over and over, running along the same trajectory at set intervals. No one ever tagged anyone. Not children's play, imitation. The building was like a closed system whose residents carried out a multitude of activities, completely meaningless ones, yet creating the impression of normal life for an outside observer. Only, I was no longer an outside observer. I was watching very closely. I began to suspect my life depended on it, that I absolutely had to understand what the hell was going on here. In nature, there are small beetles called Lomechusa. When they get into a healthy anthill, they lay their eggs there. The beetle secretes a certain euphoric substance. Under its influence, the ants lose the ability to act and think properly. They lose interest in both the beetle and everything else, stop working and foraging, wander in circles aimlessly. Lomechusa eggs are indistinguishable from ant eggs, and when the larvae hatch, the drugged ants continue feeding them as if they were their own. From the outside, an infected anthill looks perfectly normal. But if you look closely, it becomes obvious how wrong things have gone inside. Lomechusa. That's what I was thinking about as I sat on the bench before entering the stairwell, and closing the door behind me into the building where my laptop doesn't see a single Wi-Fi network except mine, where it turns out many apartments are rented out at attractive prices, slightly below market. In my nightmares, I wander through empty stairwells and the strange labyrinth of apartment corridors inside the building. Nothing happened, but that feeling. As if a well-coordinated choir is whispering words to me that I can't understand, and my anxiety gradually turns into panic, and I search for the exit to the street, but cannot find it. Breaking down, I finally called my father. The verdict: either I stop fooling around, study, and live here, or he withdraws my documents from the university and takes me home. He hung up. I simply cannot go back there. But I can't stay here either. Every night, the entire population of the building watches me. After a couple of hysterical episodes, I seem to have emotionally exhausted myself. I go to classes automatically and carefully take notes that I later can't make sense of. Simple food has lost its taste, though what taste is there in store-bought dumplings? My plans to find a job have slipped to the background. Lead heavy head in the mornings. In the evenings, I lie on the bed doing nothing, listening to the sounds behind the walls. Someone watching a movie, someone yelling at a child. All of it lies. Several more weeks passed like this. Tonight, late after midnight, I was returning from the library, and as I passed my neighbor's door, I simply reached out and pulled the handle. Hard to say why. My state of apathy is to blame. The door opened into an apartment with a layout similar to mine. Through the hallway, I saw a lit, almost unfurnished room. And in the center, on the bare floor, sat my neighbors, with their backs to each other. The woman, her husband, and a girl younger than me, whom I hadn't seen before. The daughter. No one reacted to my appearance. The husband, with a completely empty face, stared at the wall in front of him. The mother and daughter were animatedly arguing about whether the daughter could go somewhere overnight. Lively, such real voices. Turn away, and you could smile, imagining a cozy domestic scene. Their faces, both the woman's and the daughter's, expressed absolutely nothing. They weren't even looking at each other. They were looking straight ahead. The argument broke off mid-word, and then all three of them looked at me. I am finishing my report, and dawn is already breaking outside the window. I slammed the metal door shut, locked the main lock and the latch, and leaned against it with my back. Catching my breath, I quietly slid open the peephole cover. Of course, all three of them were standing right behind the door, motionless and silent. I called my father again with my last bit of money and screamed something incoherent, calling me a damn junkie and saying I knew it. He hung up. He will come, but driving to Moscow from our town takes about 8 hours. The internet isn't working. It's the first of the month. How convenient. Now, there's a silent crowd standing outside the door. Probably the entire stairwell has gathered. The building is very quiet. In all the windows I can see from here, figures stand frozen, and they no longer step away from the windows. I made a terrible mistake. I should have gotten out of here immediately. My father will come. Yes, I'm just afraid it won't be me who opens the door, but his perfectly normal, respectful son. He'll apologize for his behavior. Maybe he'll even offer to introduce him to the neighbors. They're such nice people.